We are live. This is Emil Fisher with another episode of the BCTL podcast. Today, I've got Doctor Kickass, aka Mike Piekarski. He is a doctor of physical therapy. And interestingly enough, we didn't train much, but we actually trained together about 15 years ago when we were in college at Binghamton University. I wasn't doing as much jujitsu back then as Mike was, but anyways, how you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing pretty good. It's kind of crazy, like you said, like blast from the past. That picture you showed from when we used to train together. I feel like I had the same hair when I was in undergrad. My excuse is quarantine. I can't get a haircut, so.
You got pretty good hair. Who do you think has the best hair in jiu-jitsu?
That's a tough one. I'll go with my buddy Dustin Akbari just because I train with him.
Dustin Akbari has pretty impressive locks. He does have a good hairdo. So you are a black belt under Henry Akins, correct?
Correct. I'm his. He promoted two at the same time, me and another guy, and he has one other black belt currently.
Very cool. And how long have you been a doctor of physical therapy?
I got my doctorate degree in 2015, so 5 years.
So you've been a doctor of physical therapy in 5 years, or for 5 years. So,
correct.
I guess the first question is, what exactly does a doctor of physical therapy do in comparison to some of the other, labels like a physio or a chiropractor or a physical therapist? What do you do that kind of sets you apart?
Okay, so a physical therapist is just my license. I'm a licensed physical therapist. It's a degree. So there's some people, because it didn't become required that you need a doctorate degree until I think 2010. So back in the 90s, it was just a bachelor's degree. In other countries, it's just a bachelor's degree. Then sometime in around 2000, they changed it to a master's degree. So now all entry-level physical therapists coming out of the U.S. have a doctorate degree. So a physio is just what they call physical therapists. In other countries, it's the same thing. They might just not have a doctorate degree because it might not be required to practice there. And then a chiropractor it's just a different view of medicine. But realistically, if you look at the difference with how chiropractors are changing, so now they're going the more evidence-based route. Physical therapists are going the more evidence-based route. So I wouldn't really be surprised if, in 20 years, they're very, very similar. As is, if you're dealing with a good chiro or a good PT, they're going to look pretty similar.
So, what do you think about the field of chiropractic and that because I know a lot of fighters and a lot of competitors use chiropractors, go to chiropractors and swear up and down by them. And there's also a lot of people who think it's quackery.
So it depends on how the chiropractor is practicing. All right. So there's an older model, which is, like I said, chiropractors are going more the evidence-based route, but there's this older model where there's this concept where things are out of alignment and that they need to be adjusted. Well, if you look at the literature, it doesn't seem like that actually holds true, where, you can actually look at diagnostic images and show that, one, what they say out of alignment is not true, and that, two, that our ability to palpate that is so poor that really what they're figuring out is something else. So that being said, I don't agree with a chiropractor who just does a manipulation and says, see you later. What a manipulation is it's like when you get your joint put to its end range and you crack it, it releases these chemicals in your brain, so you feel good, and it creates this temporary window where things are starting to move better and you maybe have less pain. But if you look at the literature, that pain relief will only last for, it depends on what study you look up. It could be 20 minutes, it could be 8 hours. Now, I'm not saying that is not a useful tool. I don't agree with someone who just does an adjustment and then says see you later. So how I would do an adjustment, and I've taken many courses with chiropractors, which are great, but what if you do some kind of adjustment, manipulation, manual therapy. The next step is then to retrain the body. So the idea is that you create this temporary window where things move better. Now you have to actually train the nervous system to use it, or whatever that was just a transient like feel good moment, and then it's gone. So there's some chiropractors that they say, okay, well, just come get an adjustment every day for the rest of your life, or 3 times a week for the rest of your life, because we need to make sure you're aligned. I don't agree with that, but if you use manipulation as an effective tool, I mean, it can help people with pain relief, in conjunction with other treatments.
Mm-hmm. That's very informative. Now, you're probably best known in jiu-jitsu for your very interesting charts that you put out on your Instagram page and on your Facebook page, outlining the mechanisms of various submissions and techniques. How did you get started doing that? What prompted you to do that? And how has that kind of taken a life of its own for you?
So, I mean, we've been training for a while. So I remember probably back in 2014 or so, leg locks still weren't really that big. People did them. When me and you trained at Binghamton, it was like the Wild West. We could do whatever we wanted. But for a long time, leg locks were just looked down upon. So, yeah. I mean, I always did leg locks because I found that, why not attack the body? I'm not going to say the Danaher term, but you know what I mean? Just I'll attack anything I can. So I've been doing them, and then it would be interesting. I'd go places, and I'd go to different gyms, and they're like, "All right, don't do leg locks. I mean, don't do any leg locks, even straight ankle locks." And I remember I was going with the purple belt, me and a purple belt are going. I was a purple at the time too, and I go for a straight ankle lock, and he taps. He's like, "Hey, I don't do that leg lock stuff." I'm thinking straight ankle lock. This is legal white belt gi. I'm thinking this division, because there's those two types of people. There's people who were so afraid of anything with the feet, they would tap instantly. They didn't even wait at all. I applied no pressure for the straight ankle lock, and they're tapping. And then there's people, you get them in the heel hook, and you're literally you're looking at them and be like, dude, you need to tap because I'm about to shred your ACL. So it was what I found was that it was just that leg locks were just so poor awareness. People didn't know what it was. You know what I mean? So I was I feel like I need to explain it to him. So on a whim, I was talking to my friend. I'm like, I'm going to do this. So I made a post on how heel hooks work, and I started just breaking it down for all the different leg locks, for toe holds, for straight ankle locks, and heel hooks, because I was hoping to educate people. And then at one point, funny enough, there's an Instagram handle, the leg locker. I was actually considering stopping doing my Instagram because I didn't think people were really paying attention to it. He shared something, and then that was what I needed to get traction, and from that I was able to grow it.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. For me, I know that contrary to some popular beliefs, leg locks do work, but it's interesting to see how they work. I also like some of the exercises that you've shown, covering kind of some of the prehab that you do. Can you talk to me a little bit about what prehab is and how jiu-jitsu competitors and athletes should be doing that? Some basic guidelines that people should be thinking about.
Yeah, I think prehab is kind of interesting because when you're in your 20s, you don't really care. Injury prevention just doesn't matter. You just care about performance. Then once you get into your 30s, I'm 35, I know you're in your 30s, it's you kind of think a little bit different because now you get these lingering injuries. If you look at the evidence, the intervention that has the best method of reducing injury is strengthening or strength training in some capacity. You look at stretching, you look at balance. Doesn't really balance. There was a little bit of evidence. Stretching, there really wasn't. So what prehab is essentially preparing your body for the activity that you're going to do. Jiu-jitsu, we put a lot of stress on our body. Not even submissions, people cranking on our limbs, but also just the chances of a scramble where people are just going to be takedowns, or people are just going to roll into your knee or something like that. So the importance of prehab is obviously the stronger we can make someone, the less likelihood that they're going to get injured. Now, it doesn't matter how strong someone is. You do certain things, if someone dive bombs my knee, my knee's still going to go. But maybe I can have a less likelihood of like tearing the ACL versus maybe it was just like a more mild sprain sort of thing. So how I approach prehab is first I want to make sure that people have adequate joint health. Like, so, you should be able to move your joints in full ranges of motion without pain. If you can't, that's a problem. Maybe that you need to get that addressed. And then gradually you could start adding some strengthening. I do a method of training which is called functional range release, and functional range conditioning was essentially like joint training. That's kind of like my base mobility program. And then from there, I would do more traditional strength training. I would say for me, being in the physical therapy realm, I do see a lot more people with injuries. So I do a lot of single training, like again, like a single leg versus single arm, because if someone comes to me and they have like an injured knee, well, they're going to have an asymmetrical strength because one knee can be stronger than the other because one's injured. So I found that being really helpful in preparing someone for things, because again, we don't live like when we're doing jiu-jitsu, we're not always on two legs or two arms. It's usually like, we're doing something with one leg or one arm. Like if somebody has you in like reverse de la Riva or de la Riva, it's one leg that's getting pushed in that awkward direction. So I would do those, unilateral strengthening activities. Like I said, I think it's pretty important, especially as people get older, because your body is going to start to fall apart. I mean, that's something I've really noticed over quarantine is I haven't been doing jiu-jitsu. So I've just been doing a lot more mobility, a lot more strength training. And I'm thinking like, oh my God, my body feels really good. And I don't think it's because my body's not getting the stress of jiu-jitsu. I just think it's because I'm spending more time doing these strengthening exercises, so my body just feels better. Because before, maybe I would like skip a day of strength training because I was like, okay, well, I know I'm going to go to jiu-jitsu today. Maybe I don't want to be dead tired when I'm going to be rolling for an hour. That sort of thing,
Yeah. What do you think of so there's kind of a debate among some proponents in jiu-jitsu. There's the for example, Marcelo Garcia would say that the only exercise you need for jiu-jitsu is more jiu-jitsu. And there's a couple other people that I've heard say similar things, whereas obviously there's a lot of people that are pushing strength and conditioning, and a lot of the best athletes today are very obviously doing strength training. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's going to be outliers. I think Marcelo's an outlier. I think the key thing is it depends on the person, and they should get like some kind of individualized assessment. Like there's some people, maybe that they're really, really weak, but they have really good conditioning. Like personally, I don't do a ton of conditioning just because I feel like if you, on the grand scheme of things, you take like my muscular strength, you take my muscular endurance, you take my power, you take my mobility, my cardiovascular endurance isn't my weak point. I would say my weak point would be more like my baseline strength, and I'm doing mobility stuff to adjust these deficits. So I think that's really how people should look at it, is they should see where is the problem. I do think that a lot of people would benefit from strength training. Like if you look at professional athletes from other sports, like there isn't, you don't look at another sport and they don't do strength conditioning. They all do it. You know what I mean? So I think that's an important thing to look at. If I had to say the biggest thing that probably hurt my mixed martial arts career was I didn't do any strength and conditioning until after essentially I stopped fighting. So I remember after my last fight, that's when I started to get involved with strength training. And I didn't fight not because I didn't want to. It was just I ended up getting involved in school, going to PT school and all that stuff. And I was thinking like that was probably the thing that held me back, is I didn't have that edge. Conditioning wise, I think you can get a lot of conditioning with jiu-jitsu. Like if you go to class for an hour, that's fine. But you also have to think about when it comes to cardiovascular endurance, it's different than jiu-jitsu, because if I'm rolling with someone, I'm better than them, I can control the tempo. So it doesn't matter if my cardio is terrible. I can just control the tempo, and they can't really do anything about it because my skill is better. The advantage of cardiovascular endurance is you don't have that luxury of just being able to control. Unlike you go into a match where everyone's really going to be fairly evenly skilled, so you're not going to have that ability to just be able to control the match. So I don't know if I answered the question 100% what you're looking for. I do think that for the most part, yeah, I think for the most part, people should be doing strength conditioning if just for the sole fact for injury prevention, is, in addition to injury prevention, you are going to get those additive performance bonuses as well. I think some people will benefit from additional endurance training, depending on what their style and their skill. I think a lot of people would benefit from just general strength training. I think it is important that there's kind of like two camps in the strength world, where there's some people that go too overboard. We have to remember that strength and conditioning is a tool to prepare you for your sport, which our sport would be jiu-jitsu, versus some people kind of go too far the over end and then they become a power lifter. Again, I don't have to be strong for powerlifting standards. I have to be strong for jiu-jitsu standards, and so that I don't get hurt while I'm doing my sport.
Now, you've mentioned injuries several times, including the idea of the injury from falling body weight. What do you think are the top most dangerous scenarios for a grappler or a fighter, as far as what scenarios cause the most injuries? What when you have people that compete in combat sports come to you, apart from concussions, because I know you've talked ad nauseum on that subject on other podcasts, what are the most common injuries that you see and what causes them?
Well, so there's two questions that are going to be different. So the first one, which is, what are some of the more dangerous scenarios? And it's funny because I used to do them in competition. I don't think I would do them now. I think jumping guard is fairly dangerous, just because a lot of times when you jump, you don't really know what a person's going to do, and they might not be ready to accept it. You have to think also, like in jiu-jitsu, like there's no slamming. So if you jump guard in MMA, you can get slammed. I've actually done that in MMA because I got hit with a punch, I got rocked, I jumped guard because I knew my guard defense was good enough where I could kind of like control them to kind of get my wits about me again. Mm-hmm. But like in jiu-jitsu, if you jump guard, like technically the person's supposed to grab you, which is a problem because like what if they don't have the strength to hold you? You know what I mean? And then you have those things where people try to jump guard, and then you've seen those terrible videos or, people's knees go the wrong way. So I think jumping guard is not necessarily a good strategy. You also have to think too, where even though we're not necessarily doing street fighting, like we still should think of jiu-jitsu as some kind of a martial art, where jumping guard doesn't have like the best transfer, considering if like you ever jumped guard in a street fight and someone slammed you, you could literally die if your head hits the concrete. So I just don't think that's a great one. I would say some other dangerous ones would be flying submissions, just because, again, like when you jump in the air, you don't have good control of you and your opponent. Like it could be that you go for a flying submission and you collapse into their knee. It could be that you land on your head. And, even someone like Josh Hinger, he went for a flying armbar. I think it was one of Marcelo's guys. I'm blanking on it now. But anyway, it was relatively recently where Josh Hinger goes for a flying armbar and he lands on his head. And essentially he kind of rocked himself and ended up losing the match. So grand scheme of things, it wasn't that bad of an injury. I just feel that it's one of those things where it just more you can't control as much, so it's not necessarily a good idea. I know John Danaher's very against the flying scissor. And again, I just think it's that some people kind of jump for it without the proper control. Where if you do it correctly, where you kind of like grab onto the person, like the way that Gary Tunnen did it with Edwin Najim, like was perfect. Where he got control, he put his hand down, swung, and it looked beautiful. But sometimes people like literally just try to jump into the scissor, and now they're just going to collapse into that knee, and the knee's going to go. So one of the common trends with this is a lot of these injuries happen from standing. Now, I don't think that standing techniques are bad. I think a lot of times that there's more risk for those more severe injuries happening in standing. I actually think that it's probably a good idea for people to do more takedowns because, you think of jiu-jitsu, like you could be very, very skilled jiu-jitsu grappler and have really poor takedowns. When I think a lot of but if you go to a tournament, you always start on your feet, right? So you should at least be comfortable enough on your feet that you're not going to do something silly or respond in a kind of like dangerous manner, either for you or your opponent. So those I would say were like the more dangerous situations. I would say the most common injuries would definitely be knee or shoulder. The shoulder is one of the most mobile joints in the body. So just there's just less control than some other joints. And the knee, for the same kind of reason I just explained, where a lot of those standing injuries just have a higher chance of hitting the knee in some way, and the knee only has 2 degrees of motion, so it mostly bends and straightens and has slight rotation, but not enough. It doesn't really have a lot of side-to-side motion, so if you hit the side or have to do something where it rotates, the knee's not going to go, and an injury is going to happen.
Yeah. Now, kind of diving a little bit further into that question, what are the, as far as from your analyses that you've come up with, what are the most dangerous submissions?
I'll throw in. I would say I'll throw in a strangle. I think that it's dangerous and it's not dangerous. I mean, if you hold a strangle long enough, you can kill somebody. I also think it could be the most humane. Like if I ever had to defend myself, I would just try to strangle somebody and walk away. You know what I mean? Just put them to sleep. But you do have the ability to kill someone if you hold it long enough. We take that out of the equation. Now we go to joint locks. I do think that a heel hook has the most chance to do long-term harm. Now, don't get me wrong. I love heel hooks. I do heel hooks every day when I train. But you have to also remember that because it attacks some of the ligaments in the knee, that some of them don't heal on their own. So if you get an ACL tear, that's not going to heal on its own. So that's why a lot of times that people get ACL ruptures, either A, they live for the rest of their life without an ACL, or they have to get reconstructive surgery. So that's fairly dangerous. I would say the next probably most dangerous submission would be Kimura, just because, again, the shoulder has a lot of degrees of motion. And it's one of those things where once you're put in a position that you can't control, it's not like we're an arm bar where you have that bony block where when your elbow is getting extended, so it's like you get like a few pops before something more serious happens. Something like the shoulder, like once it's out of the control range of motion you can control, like your shoulder's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
I would say heel hook and Kimura more dangerous submissions. Yeah, I would say arm bars are probably one of the more friendly submissions, just because when you fully extend your elbow, there is that bony block. So you have ligament and then the bone. So it kind of gives you a little bit more wiggle room. I would say straight angle lock is for the most part safe. I mean, I think it's more dangerous than some people like Bass Rutten used to say. He would say that it was just pain. I think you actually can do damage, but I don't as much on the leg locks. We could look at neck cranks and twisters. I think they have more of a potential to do harm just because the neck doesn't always, or the back doesn't necessarily bend that way. But I also think that there's enough support of those structures where you're not going to have like really serious injuries. So I would say that's probably like the order that I would go in for submissions and how they are injury-wise.
It's interesting that you brought up straights versus heel hooks. In my experience as a competitor, I've had more opponents not be able to walk off the mat from a straight than from a heel hook. And I think that part of that may be because people don't take straights as seriously. Do you think do you see anything like that where there's a submission that might have a reputation for not being as serious as it is?
Yeah, I could say straight ankle lock. I think that heel hooks get a little bit more. People are more fearful of heel hooks just because of the ACL. I would say that more people with straight ankle locks, they'll just kind of like eat it, like they just let it go, and then they're more primed to take a little bit more damage. I would say arm bars. I think actually, I was looking at a study. Most of the injuries in like jiu-jitsu competition was an elbow injury from arm bars. So I think a lot of times people will let their arm go more than maybe they would with other submissions because, you could get like 3 or 4 pops with an arm bar and it's like not going to be as bad as some of the other ones.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting one because I know 2 of the people that I train with have suffered such severe elbow injuries that they will not be able to deal with them without surgery. Like they will not be able to fully heal them without surgery. Are you familiar with that injury?
Yeah, so what happens is when you have repetitive trauma to the elbow, you can get osteophyte development. So you get these little, like the bone is actually starting to change because of the trauma. Or you can get little bits of cartilage that kind of break off in the joint. And then they actually start like acting like little it's like debris, so you can't fully lock out your elbow. I know quite a few people, some of my training partners, that can't fully straighten their elbow, and it's, again, they've osteophytes in the joint. The only way you can get that addressed is to have the elbow debrided. Like, you can't do like a rehab for that. So yeah, that actually happens quite a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that heel hooks get such a bad rap, but I wonder, and you'd know better than I would, how many, like, are they statistically more damaging, or is it just that they have more potential to do damage? Like, are there?
Well, you know what's interesting? So, well, it's kind of interesting. So, one of the guys who does research, his name is Ethan Creasworth, if I'm saying his name correctly. So he's a doctor of athletic training, and he's the head of the IBJF sport medicine. So he had an interesting report on injuries. So a lot of the stuff I get was based on what he found, because he did an injury report from one of the no-gi worlds. But you have to remember that there's no heel hooks in that, so it kind of skews some of the data. I've heard him mention in the past where before, when he's worked other events, that people had a lot more injuries with heel hooks. I am kind of curious, just because if you look at modern grappling now, especially no-gi, like, the heel hook is by far the most common submission. Like, I think you can watch the trends from like 2011 to now at ADCC, where it was always like rear naked choke was king, and then I think maybe last year heel hook, there might have been more heel hook victories than there were rear naked chokes. So I am actually really interested to see the injury difference now. I haven't seen any literature on it yet, but I am really curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, just because I've probably at this point won, a good portion of my matches by heel hook, and I always check on my opponent because very often something pops. I don't think I've ever popped somebody's knee. I don't think I've ever had somebody tell me that their knee was hurt. It was always the ankle.
Yeah.
I feel like ankle
that's
injuries.
Well, so if you take a heel hook, so how a heel hook work is essentially you grasp the heel, and that you start to get tibial rotation. If you don't necessarily have your mechanics correct, for some people they're going to feel it in the ankle first. I think actually one of the biggest things I've been working on for the last 3 months is a lot of John Danaher's details with finishing heel hooks, where if again, like I've done leg locks since white belt, but I don't think I've ever finished it correctly until I finished his DVD. And just by going through some of his mechanics, where, like little details where before I was scooping the heel with my elbow, some of the details where he would say you should be scooping it with like the base of your wrist, so you actually can like really lock the ankle out. So when you get motion, it's more in the knee. I would say that's one thing that it could be. Some people, just their ankle joints are weaker, so that's the limiting factor. So the ankle goes first before the knee, so they tap before the knee starts to explode. I'd also say that the ankle is more affected with an outside heel hook, because aside from this weekend from Craig Jones and Vinny, usually we do an inside heel hook. That ligament, the deltoid ligament, is so strong, it's going straight to the knee. So I don't know if when you were doing, I don't know if you're more of an inside heel hook or an outside heel hook guy. What do you say?
Outside.
Yeah, so I would say that it could be just because their weak point is the ankle. I would say that the Craig Jones, Vinny Magalesh injury was really interesting, because that never happens where the ligament, the deltoid ligament goes. Usually, everyone feels it in the knee first. So.
Yeah. So did you watch that whole event, that whole Submission Underground, or did you just watch the?
I did. I didn't. I just watched that match because I was out when that happened. But yeah, I did watch that match. Well, I think Vinny was probably a little too bold with his leg locks don't work, and Craig Jones is not the guy to do that with. If you looked at some of his other matches, like he'll just let people crank on his leg, and it's one of those things where, maybe he has the joint mechanics where his joints move that way, but you also think that every time that's happening, potentially there's just that accumulation of trauma over and over again. It also could have been that it was like that was like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? He just let that happen way too much. I think there was a video where he was talking to Craig and Chael Sonnen afterwards, and he was saying how, like, in training, he's like, "Oh, my ankle goes in training." Like, think to myself, like, how are you letting your ankle go in training? Like, it's just training. Who cares? You know?
Yeah, I mean, it was
So,
interesting. I don't know if you saw, but he took the other foot and he turned it the wrong way.
oh no, I
So,
saw that. It was disgusting. And
yeah.
that was kind of interesting, like, and that brings us to another topic too, which is like, tapping in tournaments or not tapping. Like, look, he didn't tap, but then he just tapped like 15 seconds later. So it's like, why did he just tap when his ankle wasn't bent the wrong way? You know what I mean? Like, what was the point of eating that injury because he had to give up anyway? You know what I mean? So it's like, if I just think that if you're a competitor and someone gets you something, like, you should tap just so you can go back to training. You know what I mean? Like, it's not worth it because, he says that he's going to be back training by the end of the month. If I think, I don't know if the full injury report is out. He suspected that there was a spiral fracture of the fibula. I mean, bone healing is going to take 6 to 8 weeks. So he's not training for at least that long to let that bone heal.
Like a lot
So
of
I just
film.
don't think it's. Yeah.
I've been saying.
It was actually.
Go on.
Say that again. No, you
I
can go.
was saying. I've been saying that it's very likely that he just, he sprained his ankle while walking into the cage. It's not the leg lock that got him. What you were saying?
I know. I feel bad. That's going to definitely hurt his merchandise. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I thought it was an interesting matchup. The other matches that night were pretty good. What do you think about them holding an event right now with the current climate of things?
Well, I mean, I'm on that. There's two types of people. There's some people that are like extremely fearful, doing everything by the books, and there's some people that are kind of like blowing it off. They don't really care. I'm not blowing it off, but I'm definitely on the less fearful side. I mean, it's. I think that from like an entertainment standpoint, like, it's really good for us because when there's nothing going on, um, like, getting that one jiu-jitsu match like every few weeks is like, it's something. That's why with the UFC, when they're going to put events on, like, everyone's really excited because, like, there's nothing else going on entertaining. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I feel that like, you still have to be careful and take care of, follow all the precautions. But I mean, I think that what Chael's doing is there's like less than like 8 people in his little silo or arena at the time, so he's following the community guidelines or whatever he's supposed to be doing. So I'm not opposed to it. I think it's good as long as they do all the other stuff, like, maybe checking their fighters to make sure that they don't have it, keeping people separate. I mean, because I don't think that we're going to do well if we stay quarantined much longer. I think some people are kind of getting to their breaking point.
Yeah, it's a tough situation, which brings me to my next question. How have you been managing through this?
I was kind of lucky because I had a vacation set right before it hit California. So, like, the first week when it got really bad, like, I was in Hawaii and it was a little bit more relaxed there. When I got back to the States, my clinic is still open, but what we were doing is we were doing all telehealth visits. And then the clinic would be open for essential people. So people post-op who, like, they need to get seen because we don't want their joints to get stiff, they could be seen. So I was able to work, which was good. I haven't done jiu-jitsu in 6 weeks, which is. I would say, though, like, I have the mindset of Jocko Willink, which you can't do jiu-jitsu. Well, good. Let me do this other things. So even though I would absolutely love to be doing jiu-jitsu right now, I know that I can't. So I'm just doing other things that I wouldn't have been doing if I was doing jiu-jitsu, such as, like, earlier in the podcast, I'm doing a lot of mobility and strength work. I'm doing a lot more research and reading just because a lot of times, like, in my typical day, I'm in the clinic, I'm seeing patients, I go to jiu-jitsu, then I'm really tired. So then to, like, sit down and want to read some research papers is kind of challenging. So right now is more time for me to catch up on some of these things and work on some of these projects that I've been talking about for a while that I just haven't gotten to do.
Do you live with somebody that trains, or?
Yeah,
You
my fiance, she's a purple belt. I ordered mats, but they haven't come yet. So once those mats come, at least I'll be able to train with her.
Yeah, little product plug to a product that I have no affiliation with. There are mats that I'm serious. I have zero. I don't get anything from the sale of it, but
Yeah.
I think people should know about this. There are these folding gymnastics mats available on Amazon.com. The brand is called Balance From. It should be Balance Form, but it's Balance From. Must have
Yeah.
been somebody from another country that named
Yeah.
it. And they're like $80 for a stretch of about 10 feet by 4 feet.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
I'm just saying, and they're about 2 inches
Yeah.
thick. They feel like normal jujitsu mats. They're fantastic. So if anybody needs mats that's watching this, definitely check that out. They're fantastic.
Yeah,
Now,
I ordered like a yeah. So sorry, you keep going.
yeah, no, you were saying?
I ordered like an 8x8 mat, but like I said, who knows how long it's going to take for it to get here.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's a tough situation. Did you hear about Tanner Rice opening up his gym in SoCal?
He's actually Northern California. He's actually not that far from me. I just found I don't know the details of what like the repercussions of him opening up are going to be. I mean, like I said, I think people are kind of like getting sick of this quarantine. So I'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Now, your training history. I know that from listening to another podcast, when we initially met each other, we had both. I mean, you had just started training, or you had been training for a little bit, and I had kind of gotten back into it. Where did you train after Binghamton? Was it at Vamos's, or did you train somewhere else at all?
So I trained at a gym that was precision MMA that was in Poughkeepsie, New York, because I was pretty close to where I grew up. That was the gym that I was doing most of my fighting career out of. I moved to Long Island for physical therapy school, and that's where I started training at Vamos. So I was at Vamos for a little under 3 years. And then while I was finishing up my externship in physical therapy school, when I moved to Los Angeles, then I was training with Henry at Dynamics MMA.
Yeah. Now, at Dynamics MMA and under Henry Akins, I know that Henry's got a fairly it's like a signature style of jujitsu. It's very much that old school Hickson Gracie style. And I believe that we had chatted once about this, and you said that your style was a little bit divergent from that. What have you learned from training in that environment? What have you picked up as far as some of the fundamental mechanics in jujitsu?
Well, I think that a lot of the things that Henry does is like you take a lot of moves that maybe you learn at white belt, and then you get away with them because they don't work. A lot of the reasons those moves don't work is just because like people miss some of the details. So he's really big on just making sure you're doing everything perfect. Like I was a brown belt when I started training with him, and even though I could roll at a brown belt level, I realized that if you took my game, there was a lot of holes. Like I had a lot of things that were like probably blue belt level. So training with him allowed me to really refine things like escaping, holding position. He's really big on holding position, but before that, I was much more of a submission hunter where I'm just jumping for submissions, And even though I still like to do that, I think there is importance in being someone who can hold position and control people. Currently, when I'm training, so right now I live in Sacramento, so I get to train at Ultimate Fitness, which is Uriah Faber's gym with Team Alpha Male. So that's one of those things where it's really fun trying to hold them down because, all these guys are stud wrestlers, and because of their grappling style being like for MMA, they do not want to be on their back at all. Like they're immediately coming up. So a lot of the stuff that Henry showed has been helpful to try to work on that. I still think that the pinning that he really encourages is still one of the things that I'm continuing to improve on. But other things too, like he's really big on mount control. Just again, like in a self-defense situation, if I get to mount, that's probably the best place you can be in because you could strike and could hold people. I would say that if you look at like the no-gi grappling, well, even in gi, but the mount isn't really as utilized as maybe it was back in the day. And I would say that it is a harder position to control. So getting to train with Henry and kind of working on some of those control things has been really, really helpful, and allowed me to go back to some stuff. Like I used to be, when I was fighting MMA, I was big on rubber guard because I have the hip flexibility. More recently, I've been kind of getting away from it and going more of like a traditional closed guard when I'm playing closed guard. Open guard, I still have more of a modern style where I would do, single leg X or something to get into a leg lock position. But a lot of the stuff that Henry shows with the closed guard, just, I think it comes down to is that most people don't use the closed guard. So they just kind of like throw it away. Like it's not really going to work. And I feel like if you actually can use it well, like I know you're a big closed guard guy too. I just feel like it's a really valuable tool. Just people don't know how to use it correctly.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on something else that you mentioned a little bit earlier when you were talking about rate of submission in grappling. You mentioned that bad shots in training are a source of injury, and I've seen that quite a bit because, like you, I train in an MMA environment with a lot of stud wrestlers. A lot of people are really high level wrestlers that I get to train with, and it scares me because it's that knowledge that if they fuck up even a little bit, that could be my knee. What are some ways that a jiu-jitsu practitioner who might want to do more wrestling can train that style of grappling smarter? Because I know that wrestling is making its way into the meta of jiu-jitsu more than ever.
Yeah. I think you have to train wrestling a little bit different than you train jiu-jitsu. Like jiu-jitsu, like you do your warm-up, you do some technique, and then it's like an hour of rolling. But if you look at like the way like a lot of college wrestlers train, like they don't do like an hour of live. You know what I mean? So I think that if you're going to learn wrestling, it's going to be more live. And I don't think it has to be like static drilling. It could still be like you move around where you kind of go like takedowns 1-on-1. I think that's probably pretty good. Just you get comfortable with both taking somebody down and then getting taken down so you respond correctly. I think a lot of times injuries happen when people are resisting a takedown. For me, my takedown defense isn't that good, because I never really cared if I got taken down, which I think actually helps me because people go for a takedown, like I don't fight it as much. I would say that the takedowns that I would be more worried about would be throws. You just have to have like a good partner who's somebody who can who can control you. So when I was training in LA at Dynamics, one of my training partners was Nick Hines. So Nick Hines was a UFC fighter, but before that he was a European judo champion. I felt so comfortable doing takedowns with him because he had so much control. Like, he's literally like lifting me over his head, and then he just puts me down so softly. And he's someone where he's super competitive in the training, so it's not like he's, I mean, if things didn't go away, like he could slam me, but he never did. One of the guys I get to train with now, Dustin Akbari, he's got a really cool blend of stand-up techniques and ground techniques. I feel even though he goes fast, he's very controlled. So I think some of it's too is like knowing your training partners. You know what I mean? And if you're with someone like you're not that comfortable with, or maybe they're a little bit more reckless, maybe just give up some takedowns. Because again, if it's training, it's not a big deal if you get taken down. Like I know you, like you're a bottom guy too. So if someone takes you down, like I don't think you care, right?
It depends on the setting, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously in a points scenario, you don't have to worry about that, or you do have to worry about that. I do think some things jiu-jitsu guys could do is play more of a defensive style too. Like personally, I'm big on Kimura traps and front headlocks just because I can kind of feed them into stuff that allows me to work my jiu-jitsu as opposed to have to learn a whole new style of grappling.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's tough sometimes because if you don't know your partner, if you're in a competitive setting and you don't want to give up that takedown, it's hard to yield intelligently. And I know I saw a video of a horrific injury of a guy trying to fight a half guard sweep, and he wound up getting his knee blown out in the process.
Yeah. I mean, some of that is like, there's some stuff like you could have all the awareness, all the mobility and strength, and bad stuff's going to happen. I think a lot of it, I don't know what level you were that match you were talking about. Like I have seen that where it's like people are, Black belt, no. Yeah. I mean, because I've seen that at lower belts where maybe like someone would do something like a lockdown and they're going for an electric chair and they just don't know what to do and just respond in ways that's wrong. I mean, sometimes just bad stuff happen. Like, you know, I'm working with a guy right now and he's a black belt and, you know, he got his ACL torn just because he went for a knee cut or slice and his foot got caught. I mean, sometimes just bad stuff is going to happen. And, you know, all you can do is try to be aware that bad stuff can happen in those positions and try to avoid them, you know? I would say if I have to look at some things you could do, so I was looking at a paper specifically for judo. And what they found is that the throws that have the most likelihood to cause knee injuries are any kind of like reaping throw. So like Tayatoshi, so that's where you kind of like, it's hard to describe. But anyway, I mean, a lot of these people, you know, hopefully know a little bit of judo. So Tayatoshi is one where you're kind of like sticking your foot out and kind of tripping them over your own foot. That actually is a one throw that has a lot of likelihood where you tearing your own knee because they fall on top of your knee. I think any other throw, like certain goshis, where you're kind of like either you don't get out all the way or you chop the knee, that has a higher likelihood of hurting the knee. I think another thing that I read from the paper was having a mirrored stance having a staggered stance where your stance is opposite versus same. You have higher likelihood of hurting your knee. That could be that, like usually in wrestling or judo, most people lead with their right side. And I think jujitsu is a little bit different because sometimes you have those people that are going towards MMA and people are more likely to stand south or orthodox for striking. Like me, I stand orthodox. Even for wrestling. So that's just one thing you gotta be careful of.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned judo. When I first started training again, my father would come and train with me a little bit, and they were teaching Osogari, and I didn't know what the fuck that was. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know anything about it. I wound up actually hurting his knee really badly without even knowing what I was doing.
Wow.
Because they didn't teach it properly. They didn't explain the potential for damage that move has, and I didn't know what I was, you know. I was just drilling the technique as it was taught.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I think one thing too. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying it was awful.
Yeah, I think something too is like, I think it is important to actually get trained from like wrestling or judo from people who are like judo or wrestling instructors. I mean, hopefully they have awareness of jiu-jitsu because again, for me at my age, like I'm never going to be like a stud wrestler. I just want to be able to get takedowns that work for jiu-jitsu, you know? But I do think it is important because I know back when I started training, a lot of takedowns were taught by jiu-jitsu guys who weren't really good wrestlers. So essentially they're just teaching like bad takedowns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you considered doing more with the Doctor Kickass material that you've been putting out on Instagram? Maybe starting a blog or starting something where you're putting some of that material in a more accessible format?
Yeah, so I have a website where I go into more detail because right now most of my stuff is through Instagram, which obviously is more limited. So on my website, a lot of those things which are more snippets, I go into much more detail. I am starting to do more stuff on YouTube where I can do longer videos where I explain things. I am looking to develop 2 products right now. One, which is going to be a shoulder prehab program, which is Kimura proofing your shoulder. So it's eventually it's going to be a bunch of videos for working on mobility, strength, power for the shoulder. And then I am thinking about potentially start doing some online mobility classes, but that one's a little bit further down the road. I'm going to do my first product first and see how it works.
I mean, you might want to do it right now, considering the situation. You know, you have a huge captive audience, my man.
Yeah. Well, like I said, with the mobility thing, it's something I'm thinking about, but I have to get certified through the system first before I can do it. But essentially, it's an online joint health program, which I'd be offering. But like I said, I have to get certified in that system first before I can offer that. But it is something that is in the works right now during quarantine. Now that I got these mats, I'm getting some of the video equipment so I can start experimenting with better quality videos. So it's coming, just not there yet.
Yeah, if you want a great resource for that sort of material and disseminating it, I've been doing a lot of content on a website called rockfin.com. The payout's actually pretty good on there for content creators. If that's something that you
Oh,
want to
cool.
get into.
Okay, I'll check it out.
I could refer you if you wanted to. But anyways,
Cool. Yeah, check it out.
so there was one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I know that I said I was going to kind of steer clear of concussions because I know you've talked about it for MMA. One thing that I've heard about is the prevalence of concussions and TBI in Jujitsu because of heads knocking in training or getting thrown or slammed into the mat. Have you seen that as a thing?
Honestly, Jiu-Jitsu, no. I haven't really seen most of the concussion stuff I deal with is more striking related. I have heard a few stories where grapplers get concussions. I do know when people, I think a lot of it also could be like, maybe you get thrown and you people don't really respect the concussions. I think more of the risk is they don't really realize when they have a concussion because maybe they don't expect you're going to get a concussion from a grappling sport. Like I said, I don't see it that often. I have looked at literature. It is there, though. Like, people do get concussions. I do think that if you are kind of worried that you have a concussion, it is a good idea to get checked because with all the stuff that I've been reading, all the research, a lot of concussions can take up to 4 weeks to resolve, but people probably go back to training at week 2, and that's where you start to get in a dangerous ground. There was one famous grappler. I'm trying to remember whose name, but there was some guy on the East Coast of Pennsylvania. I heard that's what happened with him. He got a concussion. He went right back to training, and they got hit in the head. And then his concussion got way worse. He had that second impact syndrome. I'm blanking on his name now. So, like I said, it does happen. I just don't think it happens that often.
Yeah, I'm not sure who it is that you're talking about, but that sounds like a shitty situation for him. Well, we are nearing the hour mark. I'm going to take a quick look and see if there are any questions on any of the various shares that I've done of the video. Was there anything else that I did not cover that you wanted to talk about? Any topics that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think you handled it pretty well. Everything I wanted to cover, you mentioned. Okay,
cool. I'm just taking a look here. I don't see anything, but if you guys have any questions or if you guys want to check out Mike's information, it's at Doctor. Is it _Kickass?
Correct, Doctor _Kickass. And my website is www.drkickass1word.com.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if people want to get a hold of you, they can do so through Instagram, and I'm assuming your Facebook page as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Mike. It was really a pleasure to get to catch up, and, it's been, I think the last time we saw each other was 15 years ago.
College, I mean, yeah, that's funny.
All right, man. Well, we're going to go ahead and end the feed. Tune in tomorrow. I'm going to have Quentin Rosenzweig. He's going to be on at about 6 p.m. I'll be posting about that tomorrow. Then Thursday, I have Matt Heafy from the band Trivium. Friday, I have Marvin Castell, the famous Imanari roll leg locker. And Saturday, I have Joel Bain, the founder of Snake Pit USA. Stay tuned for more information for all these, and have a good night.